I was born on VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day, but only 2 years later. So my second birthday was probably the world's biggest party. And so I grew up in the afterglow of World War II, and everybody who had ever been in the war was a real hero. I thought, wow, this is really cool. I want to be a war hero when I grow up. In 2004, I finally realized me. I think it was.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War in mass marches, rallies, and demonstrations. Central Park is the starting point for the parade to the UN building.
I was a little incensed that an awful lot of people in this country had a lot to say about the war in Southeast Asia. Everybody seemed like they had a stand to take on it. Or they seemed to know, they talked like they knew a lot about it, and not that many people had really gone over there and experienced it, and then came back and could tell what was right or wrong or good or bad about it. So I wanted to go. I was a volunteer.
When I was a young man going to grammar school, I was fascinated by airplanes. When all the other kids were collecting baseball cards and football cards, I was collecting airplane cards. My 8th grade teacher had us write an essay about what are our goals for our life. And I wrote at that time that I wanted to go in the military, learn to be a pilot, get out of the military and be an airline pilot. So it was pretty magical because what I wrote actually came to pass.
You know, the key was always, as far as I was concerned, whether or not you were a grunt down in the trenches or whether you could fly. And that was my goal, was let's fly airplanes and keep it clean up there. Yeah, I had been drafted twice when I did finally finish college, and just before I finished, I went down to the Air Force recruiters and signed on the dotted line so that I was their property instead of the Army property.
In Vietnam, as we flew around, occasionally we'd see these really strange silver and dark blue helicopters. And we'd get closer and we could see very small letters on the airplanes, and it said Air America. So then we said, what's that? And somebody said, CIA. Oh, we don't want to do that. That's too scary. Really scary. We don't want to go fly for the CIA because they do spooky things. But what most people don't know, that there was a second secret little war going on in Laos, which had started way back in the late 50s and had escalated to the point where it was beginning to flare up to be quite a war. And as Vietnam flared up, so did Laos, because the Vietnamese were using the eastern edge of Laos as a supply road to supply their troops and the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. So the U.S. took it upon itself to support the local Royal Lao Army to engage the Vietnamese to divert some of them from supporting the South Vietnamese action that was going on there. Well, it escalated to the point where it looked like it was going to turn into another war. So all the powers that be got together and said, we don't want another war here. Let's make a pact. Let's agree to take all of our military out and just have advisors. So the next day, all of the guys who had gone to work in their Marine Corps uniforms, the next day went to work in civilian clothes. Nothing changed except the uniforms and the agreement. So now all these advisors were now flying helicopters, and this evolved into a company called Air America. I'd actually gotten a telegram one day, and it said, if interested in employment in Southeast Asia, call this number. Since I needed a job, I called the number. And they were hiring age 34 pilots. So I got to fly the same helicopter that I flew in Vietnam and in training. My impression was that I was going to work for the CIA, even though it was vehemently denied everywhere that the Air America was CIA. It was pretty much understood. So anyway, we just flew around and delivered stuff. Basically, helicopters are airborne trucks, airborne taxis. Whatever you can't haul by truck or taxi, call a helicopter. Up in the plain of Jars, it was like an actual battle line. There were the Pathet Lao, which were the bad guys, and there were the Royal Lao, which were the good guys. That was us. And we supported them, these proxy armies, fighting each other. And it was kind of like a chess game up there. Nobody ever really won, nobody ever really lost. It was pretty silly, actually. And also, what most people don't know is during this time, when the Vietnamese were overtaking the eastern side of Laos, they displaced about 300,000 villagers from the mountains of Laos. And those 300,000 people were refugees, and they had nowhere to go. So that our country took it upon itself to support those 300,000 people. So a vast majority of our work was supporting these people. We flew them food, we flew them rice, we took pigs, we took chickens, we took corn, we took buckets. Anything, anytime, anywhere was Air America's slogan, and by gosh, sometimes we did. And sometimes we had cargo that we just didn't ask what it was.
First assignment out of pilot training, of course everybody wanted to get a fighter, but there just weren't enough of them. And so I volunteered to be a FAC, a forward air controller, flying little observation aircraft, because that was my shot to go over to the war. I had been over there just about 6 months, and I told them I'd put in an official application, go to the Raven program. Nothing happened, nothing happened. I flew down to Van Rang and I said, hey, what's going on with this Raven application? So I went over and I sat down, and he said, well, what do you know about the Raven program? No, the Steve Canyon program. So I told him everything I already knew about it. He said, you're not supposed to know all that. And I said, well, I do, and I'm ready to go. We were not really supposed to be there. There were no American military were allowed in Laos. People knew. And if they didn't, then we dressed for them so that they did, you know, whether it was blue jeans and a camouflage shirt or whether it was a black walking suit. We were pretty easily recognizable for our non-uniform. So they told us we worked for USAID, and we grew our hair long.
Oh yeah, we knew about the Ravens. They were ballsy, to use a phrase.
They thought we were nuts.
Everybody thought our job was scary, but we thought their job was geometrically, proportionally more scary than ours, because their job was to take little small airplanes like a Cessna 150, and they would go down and go out and fly low and slow over the jungle, looking for the enemy, trying to get the enemy to shoot at them so that they could then call artillery in. These guys had maximum amounts of power. They could rain death on the enemy just instantly from the sky. There were 103 of these Raven fellows during the war, and 28 of them were killed.
There were all sorts of stories floating around about us being mercenaries or some sort of high-paid civilians. I was a lieutenant. I looked at my records the other day. I was making almost $7,000 a year over there. I was a lieutenant. We had some intelligence report of some coordinates to look at. So I was over there orbiting around, and I had a technique that I sometimes used if I didn't see anything right away. I'd drop down a little bit. I didn't want to get too low to the ground because I sometimes threw out CBUs, cluster bomb unit, oranges I called them, to see if I got a reaction from any bad guys down there with them. And sure enough, I had orbited over these target coordinates, and one of the things that got their attention when a FAC flew over, that didn't usually bother the bad guys, but they'd wait, and if you turned around and came back, then they got a little more worried, and if you circled, that's usually when they had decided that you had seen something. I started hearing gunfire. As soon as I heard the shots, I remember breaking away, diving a little bit to gain some airspeed, and then it quit. My backseater, Pathmith, said, Mr. Mike, you start engine again? I said, yeah, I'm sure trying to. I knew that it was completely tree-lined below me. There were no fields around at all, but I knew where one was, and it was to the east. So that's where I was trying to get to. Then it really hit something hard. I just remember it making what felt like a very long and split seconds, but a fall on in down to the ground. When it hit the ground, it fell over onto to the left side. The right wing was knocked off, or not knocked off, but it was broken in half, and I could hear the fuel running out of it. I heard the backseater scrambling and get out. Wiggled my way out of the window, crawled over to where the backseater was sitting on a log. And I said, okay, come on, we're going up the side of this mountain right here.
So one day, in all my flying around, I was working way up in the northwest corner of Laos, where China, Burma, and Thailand and Laos all come together. And it was the royal capital of Laos, and it was called Luang Prabang. And it was just a regular regional airport. It was a very quiet area. There was rarely any action up there. And it was just about the most routine day you could ever ask for. We finished our work, and we were coming back to Luang Prabang to go to the bar for a drink, as we always did every day after work. And as we approached the airport about 5 miles out, we began to hear a lot of radio chatter. And this was very unusual because by now everybody should be at the bar. We were late. It was getting dusk. We were supposed to be on the ground by now. And as I got closer, I began to pick up some words from the radio chatter, and I realized that what was going on was there was a swarm of aircraft flying around the Luang Prabang airport, and they were all talking because they were trying to locate a pilot that had been shot down nearby.
As we made our way up this karst, we were, of course, we were intentionally staying away from any trails. We were just going straight up the side of the karst, or diagonally up it at least. And every once in a while, I'd grab a hold of something to pull myself up, and when I pulled it, kind of got a little twinge in my arm. And I wasn't sure, but I thought maybe it was broken. So now it's an hour later. The sun's starting to go down. Getting a little concerned, but I hear a plane. So I called out again on the radio. Any aircraft, this is Raven 11 on the ground. That's a strange call to make.
I could hear the downed pilot speaking on the radio. He had an emergency radio and he was talking, but he was being garbled over by everybody else. There was about all these 10 aircraft. Everybody wanted to be the guy to rescue him. So everybody was trying to talk to him, and nobody was exercising any radio discipline. So it was really hard to hear him and really hard to talk to him.
I did not want to be out there all night and then to have to crank this thing back up in the morning.
On my first trip around the airport, when I was on the west side between the airport and the river, I noticed that for a few seconds I could hear the guy very clearly, and then it got all garbled up again. And his handheld emergency radios don't travel very far, and they're not very strong. So I made another 180 as I circled around the airport, and when I got to the opposite side of the airport, there was another time when I could hear him even better. So radio, traveling line of sight, I just connected the two dots where I could hear it best in my mind, and I said, aha, 2 points make a straight line. I had heard the word canyon. There's a canyon to my right, so I just made a right turn.
Pretty soon I heard this chopper, and I came up on the radio. I said, hey, chopper in the area. You're very close, I can hear you.
I hadn't even finished my turn when we hear on the radio, you're right overhead. So I stopped. You can do that in a helicopter. When
I saw him through the trees at a sort of a slant range distance, I had him turn a little bit.
And by this time, my crew chief says, this Ernie Cortez says, sir, I see him, he's right below us. So, okay. So I looked around, we were hovering over jungle that's has 200-foot trees, and over these gigantic teak trees. At the bottom, they're almost as big as gigantic redwood trees, but they're hardwood instead of redwood. So I don't want to crash here. This is no place to crash.
So sure enough, cable came down with a horse collar on it. I said, okay, haul him up. And so they started hauling him up, and it was a good 25 feet or more down through those tall trees. And as got halfway up, and I thought, oh, they might not recognize this guy. I said, now it's okay, this guy's an indigenous guy, you know, he's one of our little friendlies, but he's not a bad guy, he's okay. So they got him up and took that horse collar up and dropped it back down, and as soon as it hit the ground, I grabbed that thing and I put it on, and I said, take me away, and they started winching me up, and I said, now let's get out of here, just drag me through this stuff, because I didn't care, and there were vines and everything, you know, they were dragging me through, but that was okay. I wanted to be moving. I wanted to get out of there.
I really estimated at the end we'd hovered there for probably 15 minutes. So then we flew back to Luang Prabang, which was like a 2-minute flight. It was not very far that this guy had crashed. And we landed, and as I'm cooling down the helicopter and shutting down, he just gets out of the helicopter, and he just waves me like that, and he says, bye. And he walks away, and there's an ambulance waiting for them, and so they put him in the ambulance, and they drive away.
It was sure a great feeling to be back on that base. I still am not quite sure exactly who I saw there by the helicopter, but I jumped out of the carry-all there and shook somebody's hand and said thanks and jumped back in, and we raced off.
They're gone. It was the custom in those days that when you rescued someone, he was supposed to give you a bottle of booze. And I said, well, there goes my bottle of booze. That's okay, no big deal. And I never thought about it after that for a long time.
We dropped off the back seater at the local hospital, and this medic, I told him, you know, that my arm felt funny, and he had put a splint on it. He said, I think I'm going to give you a shot of morphine. And I said, I don't want it. I said, what's that going to do? And he said, well, it'll probably put you to sleep. And I said, I don't want to be asleep. I said, how about a beer? And he said, okay, we can do that. And I wandered around in there, and I found a guy who was the chief pilot, and I walked in. I looked like a Raven. I told him I was Raven 11. I had just gotten picked up on Monday by Air America guy. I said, I want to know who this guy is. I want to thank him and buy him a bottle. He said, I can't tell you. And he surprised me. And I hadn't thought about it. It makes sense that they don't just give out a lot of information, but I was kind of ticked off. I said, you won't tell me what this guy's name is? But anyway, I was on my way back up country, and I told our intel guy up there who ordered all the booze, I said, next time you put in a booze run, order me a bottle, drop it off at Air America for that helicopter driver. I don't know whether it ever happened. I should have followed up. I didn't. I went on vacation. And basically, I really did completely forget about it. I was out for 6 weeks with my arm, and when I came back up there, got checked out on the airplane again, and I wasn't quite as gung-ho. And so when my 6 months up there was over, I went on back home.
They had sighted the Strela missile in our neighborhood. The Strela missile was a handheld, heat-seeking missile not much bigger than a bazooka, which any troop in the field could carry and be trained for in about 5 minutes. It would go so fast that if you looked down and saw it coming and said, oh shit, then you died. But I talked to some of my friends, and several of us all kind of had the same thought, and we agreed that we would keep flying until the first one of these things was fired in our neighborhood, or if someone got shot down, and then we would quit. Reports came that someone had seen one of those Strela missiles. And as per my agreement with myself, I said, that's it, I quit. And when the van came here for me the next day, I just refused to go to work. So we fast forward to 2003, I get an email that a fellow has died who was one of our associates. So I decided I wouldn't go to his funeral. So I called my friend Dennis, and I said, hey Dennis, let's go to Tony's funeral. And he said, okay, let's do that. So I went the next day, and I put on my Air America baseball cap, and I'm standing on the street corner waiting for Dennis to show up. And while I'm standing on the street corner, this other guy walks up to me, and he says, oh, you must have been with Air America. I said, yeah, I was. And he says, well, I was a Raven. And we got to talking, and we swapped a few stories, and who do you know, and all that kind of stuff you do when you meet somebody. And finally it occurred to me, I said, Gene, do you know who got rescued near Luang Prabang on January 31st, 1972? He says, no, but I can find out.
Gene thought about it, and he said, well, the only guy that he remembered during his tenure there in the 71-72 time frame getting picked up by Air America was me. So when I saw Gene at the reunion last year, he said, hey, there's this guy you need to talk to.
And he sent me Mike Kelly's address. So just for fun, I had written up my story about how I'd rescued Mike years ago. So I made a copy of it, and I said, dear Mike, here's my side of the story about your rescue. I'd really like to know your side of the story. By the way, you owe me a bottle of booze.
And I wrote back and told him, and wrote back what I remembered, and sure enough, by meshing the two stories together, the information together, we were convinced that he's the one that picked me up. I immediately bought that bottle that he had never gotten and shipped it off to him.
About 3 weeks later, I got a letter from Mike saying, yes, thank you very much. You saved my ass. By the way, the check's in the mail, he says. And about 2 weeks after that, I got a bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue by UPS. Special, special bottle of booze. So now I'm emailing with Mike, and I emailed him back and said, you know, Mike, I don't drink very much anymore. You're gonna have to come help me drink this bottle of booze.
Well, I mean, it's been a long time. And anyway, Bill Collier, this is Mike Kelly, this is your guy.
Good to meet you. That's right. Good to meet you last.
Oh, what a treat.
Having missed the opportunity to formally present you with a good cheap bottle of black Audible
$3.60.
3 years ago, I get to present you with a 10 times better Blue Label, never tasted by anybody in the world that I know.
That I know either.
To commemorate my pickup by you.
What the
So I present you with this
thank you very
fine
much.
bottle of Scotch whiskey.
I appreciate that, and I think it's time to crack this baby.
I do too.
All right, here goes. Whoop. Someone should make a toast.
Well, I'm going to toast to all of the people. First of all, we got to toast to the people who didn't come back.
Oh,
Yes, we do.
I have a
We
toast.
have to do that.
Yes,
And then
we do.
we'll have to toast to the people who picked up so many of those guys and brought people back. I was never one to be picked up, other than off the bar stool or off the floor right in front of a bar stool. But to you people who did,
Cheers.
hang it out so many times.
The past,
Yes, we'll always do the past.
the present,
Well, here, and the president.
I was like presents.
Don't say president.
and who knows what.
The future. Hey, here's to the guy from Afghanistan that one day he's going to be sitting at this table trying to tell us a story.
I like their cheese.
Here's
I like
to
the
a
People you
boss.
love to hate. The people that you love to hate.
By the way, I do have a toast. A very serious one. My co-pilot, when I picked you up, his name was Richard Copey. And in 3 or 4 years ago, I don't know the exact date, he, quote, lost the battle with PTSD and blew his own brains out. So, to Richard Copey,
Richard did.
a hell of a nice guy.
None of us were sent to Vietnam against our wishes, and not only that, but once we got there, then we went the extra step and volunteered to go over to this program that was obviously more hostile. We were the kind of guys that and it was pretty typical of the personality that a commander, instead of having to prod us on, he really had to hold a lot of guys back. It made us close. It made us drink way too much. I mean, when you lost a guy, it wasn't like he was just some guy down the street or something. He was the guy that you had been working with. He was the guy that you knew really closely. You can talk to a guy that you fought a war with like that, and you can communicate with him in a way that you can't communicate with anybody else, and nobody else can communicate with you that way. There's not only a common knowledge and a bond, but they're just feelings that you have. They're ways that you understand each other. You can cry with each other and not feel bad about it at all, because of the things that you went through. I think that anything like that we do helps to just, you know, finally work some of it off.